Salam sejahtera, anda sedang menonton Awani Global bersama saya, Naila Huda. Dan pada jam ini kami nak membawakan perbincangan mengenai dengan hubungan antara China dan Taiwan yang dilihat semakin tegang baru-baru ini, terutamanya selepas lawatan oleh Speaker Dewan Perwakilan Amerika Syarikat Nancy Pelosi ke pulau tersebut. Dan Beijing bertindak balas dengan melancarkan latihan ketenteraan di sekeliling Taiwan. Membabitkan pelancaran peluru berpandu serta kapal-kapal tentera dikerahkan berhampiran selat Taiwan. Dan latihan ketenteraan China ini belum pernah lagi dijalankan pada skala yang begitu besar dan begitu dekat dengan Taiwan. Ini sekaligus menimbulkan kebimbangan berhubung tindakan China terhadap Taiwan dan sama ada Beijing akan melaksanakan blokade atau sekatan besar-besaran ke atas pulau berkenaan. Dan Amerika Syarikat pada masa yang sama juga dilihat tidak akan mengurangkan pendiriannya dengan lebih banyak delegasi membuat lawatan. Pada minggu ini saja kita melihat Governor Indiana dan juga Senator Marsha Blackburn mengadakan lawatan ke pulau itu. Selain dari aspek keselamatan, penting juga untuk kita fahami isu ini kerana Taiwan memainkan peranan yang cukup besar dalam ekonomi global. Jadi untuk mengulas lebih lanjut mengenai dengan hubungan antara China dan Taiwan dan apa kemungkinan akan berlaku konflik atau sekatan besar-besaran antara kedua-dua negara itu, sudah bersedia bersama saya ketika ini Angeline Tan, penyelidik kajian dasar dan keselamatan luar negeri dari ISIS Malaysia. Thank you so much, Angeline, for joining me today to discuss about the relationship between China and Taiwan and how that's gotten a little bit more tense in recent weeks. So this month we saw China displaying its biggest ever show of military force in the air and in the seas around Taiwan, including the firing of ballistic missiles. What do you make of these military drills?
Thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to talk about this today. My initial thoughts is that I think the escalation of this crisis could have been avoided, and I think both sides are to blame here. Many have been criticizing Beijing for their overreaction, but at the same time, I think we also need to keep in mind that Nancy Pelosi was aware about the consequences of her trip. So when we think about this, I think we need to, keep in mind that there was no geopolitical miscalculation here. All sides were very clear about the consequences. And to answer your question about the scale of the military exercises, China's military capabilities, they have been growing exponentially in recent years. And considering how sensitive the Taiwan question is to Beijing, it's not really a surprise that they tried to demonstrate their military prowess, even if it's just a drill. I think right now China is very confident and they're trying to show that. They're trying to demonstrate that they can't be messed with. And this is all really just ushering a new normal for Chinese military activities near Taiwan. So we can expect that from now on, China is going to be increasingly firm and confident on this issue.
So we want to look at these military drills. We're looking at the exercises focusing specifically on the 6 danger zones around Taiwan, 3 of which overlap the island's territorial waters. And Taiwan looks at this move as, which at the same time we saw a lot of ships and a lot of planes being blocked to these areas. Taiwan describes this move as a violation of its sovereignty and amounting to a blockade. Were these military drills a simulation, a demonstration of what a blockade could look like?
Well, it was an indication of, yes, what it could look like. But as you said, the exercises only focus on 6 areas. And, although there were disruptions on, for example, shipping and air traffic, the impact is still quite limited. So it doesn't really show us the full scale of the potential of what might happen if there was a complete blockade. Because what that would do is encircle the entire islands. That's a lot more than just 6 focus areas. And this aims to isolate Taiwan, from the outside world, from receiving foreign assistance, whether it's economic, military, or even humanitarian. What we can expect in a full-scale conflict, a full blockade, would be that China would deploy much more missiles. I think in the exercises, they only launched 11 ballistic missiles. There would be much more warships, planes, etc., as well as more advanced weaponry. And I think another thing that is important to note as well is cyber attacks would be much more severe. During the exercises, the Taiwanese government websites, some of them experienced hacking briefly. And it's not really clear if Beijing is responsible for this, but we can expect that if there is a full-scale conflict, cyber warfare will be a key theater. And apart from hacking, it's likely that Beijing will aim to use cyber warfare to restrict or even distort information in and about Taiwan.
So, if in the case an actual blockade to the fullest extent occurs on the island, what would the impact be on human lives in Taiwan?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think it's not really in Beijing's interest to harm the people in Taiwan. Uh, I think was it right after they concluded the military drills. Recently, they released a new white paper on the reunification with Taiwan, and they did say that they want to respect the lives of their Taiwanese compatriots, but that they will not hesitate when it comes to um, extremists who fight, separatists who fight for Taiwanese independence. So I don't think that they will be looking to have a kill number, if that's the right way of saying it. Um, but we have to anticipate that there will be significant casualties.
Mm. Still looking at the possibility of a blockade happening, we want to understand beyond just the security aspects and the cost of human lives that would or could happen if in the case a blockade happens, but we also want to look at the impact on other countries, a global economic impact specifically, because I think a lot of the concerns surrounding this potential conflict happening, the possibility of it even happening, is I think, when we're seeing a conflict happen in recent times, in modern times, like the Ukraine and Russia conflict, there's a lot of ripple effect being caused. And it's spread all around the world, especially with the issue of food insecurity. So a blockade in Taiwan, how could that affect the entire global economy?
Well, the impact would be monumental. I think it cannot be compared to the situation in Ukraine right now. It's not comparable. Their economies are not incomparable. I guess there's two immediate points to this. At the top of my head, first, the Taiwan Strait is a major shipping route to Northeast Asia. So this will severely impact trade, sea trade especially, not only to China, um, Japan and South Korea, but also Japan and South Korea. And these are all major economies, right? Like China, Japan, South Korea, they're all in the G20. So if these economies are hit, there will be a trickle down effect for everyone else, especially here in Southeast Asia, because they are our major trading partners. And second, what immediately comes to mind is Taiwan's semiconductor industry. It plays a huge role in the global economy. It's responsible for, I think it was 63% of the global manufacture of microchips. And it's also home to the largest semiconductor manufacturer, TSMC. So recently, the TSMC chairman has stated that if there was any military force or invasion, it would render TSMC factories non-operable. So this would mean that if Beijing decides to impose a blockade or even go as far as to invade, China will not only will China not gain TSMC operation, it also means that it sees TSMC from operating entirely, and that would severely disrupt the semiconductor industry globally. And as we know, semiconductors, they're essential components for electronic devices. So the global consequences, it's immeasurable if Taiwan is hit. I think Beijing is very aware of the economic ramifications. So yeah, I think they're very aware about the consequences if they choose to invade Taiwan.
What about Malaysia specifically? What's at stake if, in the case, a conflict erupts in the Taiwan Straits? Because you're emphasizing a lot on the semiconductors industry, which we know is a huge component of the Malaysian economy as well. So, what could be at stake for Malaysia?
I think if there were consequences for Malaysia, it wouldn't necessarily just be about the semiconductor industry. And it wouldn't really be fair to just zero in on Malaysia because it would be a global issue. But I think interestingly in Malaysia, it would mean that not just the economic impact, but the security issues at stake, especially in the South China Sea, that would start flashing up because well, Taiwan also has stakes in the South China Sea, and if for example, if China were to make a move on Taiwan, what is it to say that China will not make a move in the South China Sea as well? So Malaysia wouldn't necessarily just be dealing with an economic crisis, but also a security crisis.
Going back to the security crisis, just looking at the military drills, the exercises executed by China recently, what's also come into question and has become a concern is also the Taiwan Strait median line, with some analysts describing this line as becoming decreasingly relevant. What do you make of this?
I think those analysts are probably favoring China's position in this. I don't think it's for anyone to say that this median line is meaningless because it does mean something for Taiwan, just like how um, our EEZs in the South China Sea are meaningful to us. But it means that it's not really meaningful to China, which is why they are able to convince themselves and their allies that what they're doing is just.
Hmm. And just looking at the entire relation in general between Taiwan and China, with the recent visit by Nancy Pelosi and with subsequent visits by other Congress members of the United States, we want to understand how exactly do the people view this, and just perhaps a comparison of what it's like over there before and after the visit. Do the Taiwanese people actually care? Do they feel the tension?
Yes, they definitely feel the tension, well, at least for the moment. But at the same time, I have read reports that um, these military drills, they are so normal and so frequent that while there is tensions and the people in Taiwan do feel it, they don't necessarily see it as anything new or anything to really get worked up about because it's such a normal thing that happens in their everyday lives.
Hmm. So going back to then the relationship between China and Taiwan, how has that changed before and after the Nancy Pelosi visit? I mean, surely that's been something that's rather widely covered in international media, but has that actually created a huge impact on the relationship?
Mhm. I think my impression is actually that not much has changed. And I think this because Pelosi's visit did not alter the balance of power. What has changed is what we were just talking about earlier, that there is increased tensions. But are people acting any differently? No, not really. It's just that, Chinese military activities will probably be a lot more aggressive from now on near Taiwan. Having said that, I'm still not very convinced that Beijing will pursue reunification with Taiwan anytime soon. At least not while Xi Jinping is still in power, because as we have discussed, the consequences globally, it's going to be monumental, and China is definitely not going to be able to walk away from this situation with an easy win. I don't really think that Xi Jinping would want such a complicated legacy for himself.
How much of the internal domestic politics that's happening in Beijing with President Xi Jinping and his allies, how much of that actually has an effect on how it manages its relationship with Taiwan?
I think the way China manages its relationship with Taiwan hasn't really changed. Their stance and well, yes, their stance has remained very much the same for a very long time. Um, but perhaps what has changed is how aggressive it has become in recent years, and it has definitely a lot to do with Xi Jinping's leadership. He is really able to rally support to whatever he sets his mind to, whether it's the BRI or if it's this Taiwan issue. He's really a very influential leader. And I think under him, there's just a lot of talk about how there's a new era in China, new era under Xi Jinping's leadership. And it's really trying to point that, they are no longer a weak or developing country. They are now a very strong and powerful country. That is the emphasis right now that's under Xi Jinping's leadership. So I think um, that also informs the confidence that China has, and that's why they are acting so aggressively with Taiwan today that we haven't seen before.
So, what about the Chinese perspective then? What do the Chinese public feel about what's been happening with Taiwan and its increasing aggression? I mean, you say President Xi Jinping has had a lot of success in gathering a lot of public support for what his campaign is or what his views are. So, what then can we make of the public sentiment towards the relationship with Taiwan from the Chinese perspective?
Well, I think first we have to be very clear that it's not easy or accessible to have true insight into the Chinese public sentiments because of censorship in China. But what we do know is that nationalism has always been on high when it's in regards to Taiwan, and it's because a big part of the Chinese dream that Xi Jinping has been talking about is reunification with Taiwan. They see Taiwan as a lost territory, and it's a very sensitive part of the civil war. So reunification, it's not just a political goal, but it's an emotional issue for China. And I think that's where Xi Jinping's really great at rallying the support and tapping into those sentiments. So to an extent, I do think that a majority of the Chinese public are in support for reunification.
So that is how China interprets its history with Taiwan. But when we're looking from the Taiwanese perspective, what we always hear is the term status quo. And what they always say is the importance of preserving the status quo in regards to their relationship with China. What exactly does this mean, the status quo, and why is it important to preserve it for the Taiwanese people?
Mm. At the very basic level, the status quo, it basically follows the three no's formula by Taiwan. So the three no's are no unification, no independence, and no use of force. So at this point, preserving the status quo, I'm not really an expert on Taiwan, but I would assume that preserving the status quo would look different from administration to administration. And right now, preserving the status quo is very, very complicated given what has been happening in the Taiwan Straits, and especially as Beijing has, just recently released a new white paper on Taiwan's reunification. But right now, I think what remains quite consistent is Taiwan wants to be able to continue their self-rule, and I think they're trying to gain international support for that. I think when they try to make it a multilateral issue rather than focusing on it as a bilateral or unilateral issue, they're much better. Taiwan is much more able to preserve the status quo.
Now, we've discussed extensively about the US side and also with the President Xi Jinping and how he views China's modern relationship with Taiwan. But I think it's also worth looking at President Tsai Ing-wen and how she's been managing the current situation. Recently, she's been reported to have said that Taiwan will not provoke or escalate the current situation. What do you make of her stance? Because, I mean, previously you were saying how Nancy Pelosi, it's also worth and also important to note that, from the American side with Nancy Pelosi's visit, she knows what the reaction was like or what the reaction would have been like, and she still proceeded with the visit. But with President Tsai Ing-wen, how do you see her stance and how do you see how, she's been welcoming the American delegations with open hands?
I actually don't really see much of an issue with that because, as I've said, um, Taiwan is trying to gather international support, and it's very difficult for them to do so under this one China policy where they're not really recognized as a country. They don't have any kind of sovereignty. So I'm sure they would, to kind of take any kind of international support that it can. But at the same time, I don't think that Tsai Ing-wen's receiving of Nancy Pelosi has anything to do with trying to poke the bear in China. I don't think that they wanted to escalate any kind of tensions. I think they were just coming at it in an approach that tries to strengthen the Taiwanese position.
Hmm. But what is there to gain for the United States? Because, I mean, following from Nancy Pelosi's visit, we've seen several delegations still continuing their visits. Even this week, we are seeing, I believe, the Indiana governor, also the Senator Marsha Blackburn have visited Taiwan this week. What do we make of that?
I think actually these lower level official visits are quite common. It's not really anything out of the norm. But Nancy Pelosi's visit was quite out of the norm, especially because she's second in line to the presidency, and Beijing saw this as a threat because they don't really see the separation between the executive branch, which is the president, and the congressional branch, which is where she belongs, right? Beijing doesn't really understand that, or even if they do, they see them as very similar because they are both under democratic rule at the moment. So they see it as as a unified threat by the U.S. And um, they well, when it was Nancy Pelosi, they pulled out all of the stops. It was a very massive, large scale military exercise when it was Pelosi. But these other lower level senators or whoever that was visiting Taiwan recently, they do as well respond with military exercises, but not in such a large scale. So it shows that, it was Nancy Pelosi, like her designation, that was the problem for China.
So what exactly do we know about Taiwan's allies? I mean, going back to the question, the scenario of a full-blown conflict in the Taiwan Strait, if in the case China does more than just flying planes and launching ballistic missiles, what can we expect from Taiwan's allies?
I think everybody would first be watching how the US responds. And President Biden has said on 3 occasions that the US will intervene to defend Taiwan if China attacks. So I think if that is the case, if they don't hesitate, they step in and defend Taiwan, then other key allies will naturally come in and defend Taiwan as well. So I think Japan is probably going to be one of those that will provide immediate support. And recently, Australia has also said that they will align their security policies closer to the US and Japan in relation to Taiwan. So currently, I don't think that the Taiwanese position, it doesn't look weak to me. But at this point, it's also very much a guessing game. The stakes are very, very high, and we can't be sure what Taiwan's allies will do at the moment.
So the stakes are very high at the moment, but do you see tensions cooling down in the nearest future?
Well, everyone's been talking about how these large scale military exercises, they are a new normal in Taiwan or near Taiwan, and I think the key word is normal. I do think that at the moment it's a flare up. Tensions are high, but eventually it will normalize, and this will just become the new normal.
Okay, thanks so much. Plenty more I'd like to discuss with you, but that's all the time that we have today. Thank you to Angeline for joining me to discuss a little bit about the relations between China and Taiwan, especially since Nancy Pelosi's visit. Terima kasih kepada Angeline Tan, penyelidik kajian dasar dan keselamatan luar negeri dari ISIS Malaysia, sudi berkongsi pendapat dan pandangan mengenai dengan hubungan antara China dan Taiwan, terutamanya selepas lawatan Speaker Dewan Perwakilan Amerika Syarikat Nancy Pelosi. Dan itu saja masa kita ada untuk Awani Global Jam ini. Bersama saya, Naila Huda. Salam hormat.